So if you were watching this online, you missed the introduction because I forgot to hit record. But welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube, and now we are going to begin our program. I'm going to invite Ann Ledyard forward to do an opening prayer.
Will you join with me in prayer? Loving God, we are thankful to be in a church that supports in several ways local, national, and international nonprofit groups. We are grateful to be able to help financially and through volunteering people whose lives we believe we touch in helpful ways. And we are grateful also for the many Westminster members who are participating in this particular form of ministry. Be with us today as we share information on these groups and share how our involvement has made a difference to the groups and our own faith journeys. We ask these things in the name of the one who loves us all. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Van Vliet. I'm an elder and the chair of the Westminster Local Admissions Committee. This is my first adult ed in a while, so it's very, very fun to be here and excited to see you all. Before we get started with the meat of our program, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the Local Missions Committee to you all and what we do. As Patrick mentioned, many of our liaisons are here today, so welcome and thank you for coming to support us. Westminster is an active partner with many local mission or local nonprofit organizations that provide much needed services to our neighbors. We support the agencies with financial support and also appoint liaisons from the congregation to help our members find ways to serve in the community. You'll meet some of our amazing liaisons later today and hear about the amazing work that our agencies are doing. I can't understate just how much of the work of the local missions program is led by the liaisons within these organizations. These are Westminster members who spend and devote hours and hours of their time, and many of them have been involved with these agencies for many years and have really developed a close tie to those not only leading the agencies themselves, but also specifically those in our community who are most in need of some additional support. So huge thanks to all of you. Westminster's partnership with these agencies has created a stable relationship through the years. And many of the volunteer opportunities that you all hear about during our services and during our announcements are community events and opportunities that come from the organizations that Westminster supports. There's various opportunities for not only I think the funding type opportunities that I think many people think about, but also spending time and energy to devote just time getting to know those in the community. Through Westminster's annual stewardship campaign, Westminster's local missions team has been able to allocate more than $200,000 in the past year's budget to various causes within the community. Westminster's regular contributions are toward CHESS, which stands for Children, Hunger, Education, Shelter, and Self-Sufficiency. As you can imagine, especially in the past year, there's been many efforts in those regards with COVID and also with the efforts toward movement in racial justice sphere, which we'll talk about later. Additionally, Westminster sponsors an annual community grant program, which has provided more than $160,000 in funds in support of specific projects by a range of local nonprofits. This is including not only our partnering agencies, but also applications from groups around the community, spanning a wide range of causes. In addition to the annual budget, Westminster's congregation has generously raised funds for mission during the Christmas season at our annual alternative giving bazaar. Many of you, or maybe all of you, I think I've seen at that bazaar. We'll be having it again coming up in early December. So hope to see you all either in personally or virtually for that. If you're interested in getting more involved in local missions, feel free to reach out to Patrick or myself in person, or you can also email us at the local missions email address. And you can also find just the most up-to-date information about what our group is doing on our local missions section of the Westminster website. There's a ways to serve section that is continually kept updated. We look at it every month during our meetings and keep it up to date for you all. And with that very brief summary, I'm going to turn it over to Jill from the Therefore Committee.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jill McGuire. I'm a member of the Therefore Committee, and I'm also a member of the National Mission Committee. So not local, but our national mission work. So mission work is very near and dear to my heart and something that's very important to me. But really glad to be here with all of you this morning. So I just wanted to provide a bit more background from the Therefore Committee on what brings us here today. So as you may remember, or you may have participated in, the Therefore Committee hosted a number of discussion groups earlier in the year, and that was intended to engage members of the congregation on topics and questions surrounding race. And those discussions generated a number of ideas and suggestions about steps that Westminster could take to evaluate our past, our present, and our future as a congregation concerning racial issues. And from those many ideas, the Therefore Committee took them, we talked about them over a series of weeks, and we made 9 recommendations to the session, and those were adopted by the session. And today we'll discuss in part one of those recommendations. So I'm going to read it and quote it, but Patrick's going to pull it up for you all to see as well. So this recommendation is centered on mission work, and it is a direction to create an inventory of our mission programs to evaluate the extent to which they promote racial understanding and equality, with an eye to exploring how we can expand our activities. So as Patrick and Stephanie and I began to discuss this topic and how do we go about doing this, what does this mean? And we discussed it with local mission and in their discussions, we discussed it with others. A few questions started to emerge. And one of the first questions was, with our language of promoting racial understanding, what does that really mean? What does it really mean to understand? Is that an awareness of how people experience life and how those differences may be different from our own? We also kind of paused on promoting racial equality. What does that really mean? And then this generated another conversation about equity. What is equity? What is equality? And as we started to talk about that, we were trying to kind of navigate through these topics, and we came across some graphics that at least helped me to start contextualize what some of those words mean. I guess, Patrick, if you can pull up the first one. We found one, and this has been around for a while, so you may have already seen this, but it's talking about equality versus equity. And here the artist is showing us that you have 3 people going to a baseball game, and each of them have a box. So we have equal supports going to them, but you see 3 different outcomes for these individuals based on the supports that they have. So, one person's well positioned to see the game, one person can mostly see the game, and one person, even though they have the same support, cannot see the game at all. And so equality may assume that everyone benefits from the same supports, but the artist is also showing us that equity may mean that we need different supports. So you take the same 3 boxes, and you move those boxes to people to meet them where they are. So in that second graphic, you can see that the person who needs, maybe that person needs 2 boxes to be able to have equal access to this baseball game. And what was interesting to me as well as I was looking at this, I found other renditions of this graphic where they removed the fence. And that got me thinking as well. And the idea there was, what about also removing some of the barriers that are preventing those folks from seeing the game? There was another graphic that I ran across. I'm a visual person, and I liked this one as well, just had me thinking about it a little bit differently. So in this graphic on the left, we've got equality. So we have 2 parts of town, each have what appear to be an equal pipeline of community resources going to the 2 parts of town. You can see in that first graphic with equality, one part of town is also already quite prosperous. And while the other part of town is receiving what appears to be the same type of resources, they're not experiencing the same kind of prosperity. So again, looking at equity and thinking about, do we need the same supports or do we need different supports? Again, showing in that second graphic, maybe those supports need to look different in order to get people to a point where they're able to experience equal access or equal means to prosperity. So I will confess that don't have an answer for you on how all of this kind of fits together and how this, what this means for our mission inventory and what this means for Westminster. At least I'll say that for myself. But we thought this was helpful to start asking these questions and having these conversations and starting to think about these concepts as we move forward in this project as part of the Therefore Committee recommendations. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Okay. I am going to. What am I going to do? That is the question. Okay. So thank you, Jill. It's funny when you were going through that all this time, even though we've had this conversation how many times, I was flipping it. So I thought equality was what they're showing as equity. So it gets very confusing. And I understand from the Therefore work that it wasn't a decision about that there wasn't okay, we've chosen this definition for equality. So we're kind of working that out ourselves. So that is a preamble to, I'm just going to show some stats about inequality, and maybe the better word would be inequity. But I thought that this was something that helped me frame when we're looking at our local missions and the things we support and the things we do. If we agree that there is inequality in terms of matters of race or equity, depending on how you want to define it, what does that look like? And to use that as a prism to navigate, this inventory of what we're doing. So nothing that I show you today, I think, will surprise you, but it's important, I think, to see it. And hopefully it comes through from where you are on the screen. I hope our folks at home will be able to see this, but I tried to pull up graphs that were as visual as possible because it's going to be hard to read all this, but the difference in median wealth, and this is, I tried to attribute the sources as best as I could. This is from the Federal Reserve. I believe it was a Reuters website that I stole this from. So giving all credit so that the lawyers in our midst do not get angry at me. But Black Americans have 1/10 the net worth of white Americans, and 1 in 5 Black households has zero or negative net worth compared to nearly 1 in 10 in white households. So again, just a visual. Home ownership rates, 73% to 44%, according to the US Census. This is a breakdown of median income, also from the Census Bureau, and it lists different racial categories. You'll see that white, though, is on the upper tier, and people of color are on the lower. If I'm a quick math person, it's more than 2/3. Retirement savings. Black households nearing retirement have a median savings of $30,000, which amounts to 1/4 of the amount held by white households. And think of the ways that ripples down generation to generation. Healthcare. A larger share of Black Americans lack health insurance as compared to whites. Pregnancy-related deaths, disparities start in the delivery room. Black women die 3 times more often when they give birth, according to the CDC. And so, not surprisingly, life expectancy in both genders, we see a gap. And then the quality of life and the justice of life, the incarceration rates. So African Americans constitute 13% of the US population, but around 33% of all incarceration. You see those numbers have been going down, but yet the disparity exists. And I think the next slide just basically restates that. One thing here you'll see in the last sentence just talking about people of color facing longer sentences for similar crimes and do have a greater chance of dying from an encounter from a police officer as compared with whites. Here's the sentencing slide. Again, everything's connected, right? So if voting, the right to vote is tied to your legal status, you'll see that 1 in every 13 Black people lost their right to vote due to a felony conviction compared to 1 in every 56 non-Black voters. The last one. Food insecurity. Again, just a disparity. It's getting repetitive now, but just to kind of do a survey. And that was heightened during the COVID pandemic. Nearly a third of Black households faced some form of food insecurity. There's an education gap. This is bachelor's degree attainment, and there's a 16% point gap. And that's been pretty steady since I was a high school student. One of our local missions partners, at least one of our local missions partners, provides high quality preschool. And we know the relationship between a high quality preschool and educational achievement and readiness. So 15% of Black children attend such a preschool as compared with 24%. And I thought this was interesting too, given, given the diversity at Alexandria High School, at Fairfax and Arlington, but in the country itself, more than half of the US students attend schools with populations that are more than 75% white or more than 75% non-white. And there's a difference in spending per student in those districts. So if the numbers are to believe, that amounts to a deficit of 23 billion in schooling alone. So what do we do with that? That's the question. How do we, I think we let ourselves feel it. The Therefore Project and the task that the missions committees has about creating an inventory. These words are neutral. They're disinfected, if you will. And I don't mean that critically, but we have to remember that there is a lament here that we ought to hold as part of this inventory taking. And we probably all disagree on how and why these numbers exist, but these numbers exist. And so what we're tasked to do as a church and as a missions program is to consider how our support, as Stephanie said, we've got 15 partners locally. Our annual budget for local missions is in the neighborhood of $130,000. It was higher this year because we had a great COVID surplus, but that's a significant amount of money. What are we doing and how is our work addressing those slides? And you're going to walk away from today saying, well, we didn't answer that, but we're going to sit with that question. And we have personal stories and narratives that will help us with that. So we'll stop. We're going to keep going. There's time for questions, but I think it's time to introduce. Let me see. I can't.
It's me next.
Oh, that's right, Stephanie. There you go. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah,
This is what you do when you walk to the podium without your outline. But Stephanie's going to give us some inventory of a quick inventory of what we found in our local missions partners and what they are doing in this area.
So I think what Patrick was saying about just letting ourselves feel it is really the important takeaway. And I think that when our committee was having this discussion, we really only just started the conversation. And I think that really truly that is the overarching takeaway from our initial conversations is just, you know, our church has a number of just really caring, amazing people who want to do something when they see numbers, as like Patrick was sharing. So yeah, this past September, we started in the local missions group, discussing what the Therefore Committee has tasked us with, which is first and foremost, just taking stock of what the agencies and what Westminster is already doing in this realm, and what racial justice can look like within our group. So our first step was to take stock, and so our liaisons went to their agencies and spoke with their leaders about what the groups were already doing in this area. Many of the agencies that we work with have been supporting those in our community for quite a long time, and have been working towards anti-racism in a variety of ways. And I think that the overarching message with all of the groups was that there was a huge disparity in, well, I should say a disproportionate number of those that were being supported by our agencies are people of color. And again, as Patrick was saying, there's a lot of reasons for that, and the historical background as well. But truly just sitting with that and discussing with our agencies on what they're already doing. They're doing some amazing work. I'll mention a few of the activities that the groups and leadership have been doing, but I just want to emphasize that this is by no means an exhaustive list. We'll hear from several of our panelists who will be discussing their own particular groups. One of which is Carpenter Shelter. Carpenter Shelter is one of the groups that our church has been involved with for quite a long time. And it supports people who are experiencing homelessness and those at risk to achieve sustainable independence through shelter and housing placement. One of the areas that they've been doing, especially in the last couple of years, is putting in place programs which strive for racial equity, meaning that everyone's given the help they need to make to have the same opportunities regardless of color. So they're in the second year of expressly looking at the link between racial equity and homelessness. As I mentioned, those helped by the shelter are disproportionately people of color, which is due to the inequities, systemic racism, and historical background at large. So we will talk a bit more about the specific programs in a moment. But another one of our agencies that is making a lot of strides in this space is OAR, which I think many of you are familiar with, and Marty is our fearless liaison within that space. It stands for Offender Aid and Restoration. And it's a community-based nonprofit, which envisions a safe and thriving community where those who are impacted by the legal system enjoy equal civil and human rights. And they do both upstream and downstream work. And I think this is an important area to focus on, because I think that oftentimes when we're talking about this discussion of racial equity and justice, we focus a lot on the immediate needs of helping individuals, which is essential and very, very important. But there's also, I think, another element to it, which is kind of why it's happening in the first place, and what we can do to alleviate the systemic nature of it. So that's in part the upstream work that OAR does, which is in part just calling out that disparity, which permeates the systems, especially within our legal system and in incarceration. And through the upstream work, they confront and dismantle racism in legal systems and across all systems, including housing and food security and all of that. Whereas the downstream work that they also do includes work directly with individuals returning from the community, or returning to the community rather, from incarceration, and supporting the families in that homecoming process. They also offer alternative sentencing options through community service to youth and adults to avoid the trauma of incarceration. As you can imagine, with many communities, if your parents have gone through that experience, there's a ripple effect. And so that's part of what OAR looks to fix. Patrick showed you earlier that some of the statistics in racial inequality in sentencing for similar crimes. For OAR specifically, the overall population that accesses the services from OAR is 48% African American, 21% Caucasian, 11% Latina, 3% multiracial, 2% Asian Pacific Islander, and 11% other or non-identified. In the reentry program specifically, there's a larger percentage of participants are people of color, and that's more than 80%. One of the reasons that they think that might be the case is just with an effort to stop the family ripple effects. Virtually all of those in the reentry program have qualify as low income or have no income at all. And there's also a significant educational disparity, many of whom have only a high school education or less. OAR is the only nonprofit in the DC area that not only works with individuals themselves, but also is working on those systemic racism elements responsible for mass incarceration and other structural inequalities in our society. They're unique in their efforts to reduce incarceration by providing courts with, as I mentioned, alternative sentencing options. And they're also doing a program called Undoing Racism, which is specifically a workshop that is for members of the community. So if that's, I think Patrick, you participated in that. I have not, but I've heard it's great. So if those of you are interested, definitely feel free to connect with us and we can put you in touch. They're also just involved in general at changing, seeking to review and look into current laws, regulations, programs, and policies that exist in our community. Many of our other agencies are doing just fantastic work, including Alive. We're building Carpenters, bag lunch programs, and just fantastic work in helping the individuals in our community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who's going to introduce our panelists. Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite our panelists to come up and have a seat. Louise Anderson, Ruth Kane, Eric Wise. I learned maybe something we didn't know before, and that is we have 15 local agencies that Westminster supports. And we could have had 15 people up there. But we just chose 3 to represent us today. But Stephanie said that Marty represents OAR. And Deborah Livingston over there represents Guest House.
And Meals on Wheels.
And Meals on Wheels, right, thank you. And almost every month on Tuesday nights, first Tuesday of the month, we meet here. We're back meeting here, sometimes hybrid, but we meet almost every month to talk about what our agencies are doing and how we can be helpful. So I wanted you to know that. This morning, we have 3 people who have dedicated a number of years in representing this agency to Westminster. Rebuilding Alexandria with Eric, he's done it for years, leads a team that participates most springs, I think. Ruth has done her carpenter shelter for years, and she's going to be talking about that and going into a little more specificity about numbers and who we serve and that. And Louise has been involved for a long time with Alive. And so she's going to start us off today by telling a little bit more about carpentering, or about Alive, but also going into, we wanted each one of them to make it more concrete and talk about how their volunteering has impacted their own personal faith journey, which is, a byproduct of this kind of ministry that our members are doing. So I'm going to invite Louise to start us off, and she will turn it over to Eric and then to Ruth.
Thank you, Ann. I'm Louise Anderson. I've been volunteering for Alive since about 1980. Can you take my mask off?
Yeah.
Good. That's why I put lipstick on today. So, I have been volunteering for Alive since around 2000. Westminster was a founding congregation of Alive, which was founded in 1969. So Westminster's support for Alive, which is actually an acronym for Alexandrians Involved Ecumenically. I don't remember how many initial founding congregations there were, but there are now 48 congregations supporting the work of Alive. Alive has been providing a social safety net for the city of Alexandria for obviously over 50 years. And through food, they had a child development center, which is now closed. They have housing, they have family assistance, they have a furniture program. And as I said, I'm called to hunger issues and always have been. You should taste my chili. So I started volunteering for the last Saturday food distribution around 2000. And of course, if you are somewhat even marginally competent, you're going to end up running it, which I have been doing since 2001. Over that time, I probably have had literally thousands of volunteer hours from Westminster members. I was the site that I ran, which is the Ladre building, which is in North Old Town. This is public housing for the city of Alexandria. These are the oldest and the poorest people in the city of Alexandria. And Westminster folks, either individually or, the session has volunteered together, families have come together, youth have come together. The special thing about the site that I ran until pandemic was that about half of our clients were too old or infirm to come pick their food up. And so we would send teams out to deliver the food. And this, we always made sure, especially if somebody was a first-time volunteer, that they delivered. Because it's one thing to be putting bags together of food. It's another thing to meet your client. And particularly because these are, again, the oldest and the poorest people in the city. And it is literally life-changing for a lot of, particularly the youth. And of course, the senior citizens love our young people. So it was a really powerful experience for a lot of the kids who volunteered for me over those years. And not just kids, but everybody. But you're not just, as I said, putting cans in a bag. You're meeting the clients, and they're deeply grateful for what we were doing for them. And that was true of me as well. The powerful thing about volunteering for Alive is that Alive is supported by every flavor of congregation in the city, including a Baha'i group. And over the years, you were working side by side with people of every race, color, and creed to serve others. And there's nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing more powerful than to remind everybody that we're all the same, and that we all have a common purpose, which is to serve others, and that's why you're there at 5:30 on a Saturday morning. And I think the key thing about Alive is that we serve together. And personally, they have a furniture program, and every time that I do it, every single time I do the furniture program, you're going to one house and you're walking in, and you'll be walking into an apartment, and there will not be one stick of furniture in this house, and there's always a child. And you're thinking, I've been grappling with this my entire life. I can't fix poverty. I can't fix that, but I'm going to make sure that kid has a bed. And if that's all I can do today, that's what I can do today. And so through its many different programs, Alive has, as I said, been serving as a social safety net for the poorest people in this city for over half of a century, and helping lift them out of poverty if it's possible, and if it's not, to at least meet their needs where they are that day. So it's been an honor for me to serve this group, and I look forward to doing it for a long time.
Thanks.
Oh, Eric?
Before you start, Eric, I don't see any deck stain on Eric's hands. Eric spent the whole day yesterday and the week before working on the guest house decking and backyard. He managed a volunteer team with Deborah. So anyway, Eric, and he's delivering flowers after the service for communion for the deacons. So good job today. The halo's glowing today.
Thank you, Patrick, and you were there. So I'm here as the liaison between Westminster and Rebuilding Together Alexandria. I don't know how long Westminster has been involved with Rebuilding Together, because it was going on when we joined about 15 years ago. So it's been longer than that. Rebuilding Together is a national program with local organizations, and what we do through that is to try and keep people in their homes. We work with homeowners, and especially elderly homeowners, to keep the housing safe and decent. So we have one rebuilding day every year. It's going to be, we hope, April 30th next year, 2022. It was canceled for the last couple of years because of the pandemic, although in August, Westminster was the first group to go back out, and we worked on the side yard and backyard that was totally overgrown and a danger to a gentleman down the street from Westminster here, so that you can walk in his side yard without tripping. I learned later on that he had suffered a stroke And so, you notice people aren't walking too well, you get older and that happens just as a normal course, but he had some additional issues. Kind of an odd coincidence in this case, I volunteered with Meals on Wheels, and guess whose house I show up to every month? The same gentleman. So, yeah, what we've done in rebuilding in many cases is we put in grab bars in bathrooms. We've put in extra banisters so that, for those of us who are mobile, one banister, one railing on the side is enough, but for some people who are really challenged, you need to have two. A lot of these houses don't have any, especially going down to a lower level, a basement or whatnot. We've got an amazingly talented group of people who can figure out how to fix a lot of things around the house. And I've accumulated a number of tools over the years, and a lot of experience I've learned from a number of good church members, both here at Westminster and at previous churches, so that we can help these people stay comfortably, safely in their homes. Depending on how their health works out. Rebuilding does things year round, though. I've worked on building a community garden back behind one of the community centers here in Alexandria. I've worked, in addition to the April date, on these various houses and met just a lot of wonderful people. I think that kind of like what Louise said, getting to meet the client and getting to talk to them for a while. So I may go out, not so much these days because of COVID, but and spend half a day or a day working on somebody's house, fixing the toilet or whatever they need, but also getting to talk to people. And I think that's what a lot of people have found enjoyable about any sort of volunteering project. Again, as Louise was saying, talking to the various folks. I get to meet new members of the Westminster congregation. I get to meet members of other churches, and it led me to volunteer with a lot of people who would volunteer with Rebuilding Together to help Agudas Akeem build a playground for their young kids, with some professional support in that case, but it was a nice opportunity to get to talk to people. We've got a good crew of regulars and good crew of people who just come and join us on an ad hoc basis every year. I was asked to mention names, but I'm afraid to either bore you with a whole long list of names or forget somebody who's very important, but I will call out Chris Miles, who's been the co-project leader on this for a number of years. And well, he's sort of a professional with this because he works at the Architect of the Capitol and manages projects there. So he has a different set of background than I do. My professional career was working in housing economics and housing finance, and I'm not sure how I learned how to do all this stuff, but I did. So I guess I'll turn it over to Ruth.
Before I get started, Eric, I think you were awarded the Volunteer of the Year by.
Oh, yeah.
Recently, for all your names. Carpenter Shelter, as you may know, is a 60-bed homeless shelter here in Alexandria. And Westminster was one of the early congregations to get involved in the establishment of the shelter. And we've seen it in two different warehouses on Duke Street and a former registry of motor vehicles in North Old Town, in the then closed Macy's department store over at Landmark. And now, as a result of a $2 million capital campaign that Westminster contributed to, a brand new, very light build, very clean, very beautiful, purpose-built shelter back on North Henry Street, close to the Braddock Road Metro, which obviously benefits residents. So when you go into the shelter, you don't just get a comfortable bed and 3 healthy meals a day, but you also get all kinds of wraparound services. You'll get a case manager who will help you with all kinds of things, including job coaching, resume building, interviewing, computer skills, financial literacy. There's a medical clinic that's staffed part-time at the shelter by a volunteer doctor and a couple of nurses who come in a couple of times a week. And they help people with blood pressure medications and diabetes medications. They can give people prescriptions for free mammograms. So basic healthcare needs. There's a part-time mental health therapist who will come in and work with residents of the shelter, and especially during the pandemic, with staff as well. And that counselor's hours were, as you might imagine, up during the pandemic from part-time to full-time for a period of time. There's a whole staff of people who are housing locators. In fact, we have a member of our Westminster church who's on staff at the shelter, and they spend their days building relationships and calling landlords and trying to find affordable housing to move people out of the shelter and into housing. There's rental assistance, and some of us can remember maybe way back in the days, or your own children going to their first apartment and needing first month's rent, last month's rent, and then big security deposit. It makes it very difficult for people experiencing homelessness. So there's assistance for that as well. Their residents are provided 3 meals a day, which I'll talk more about in a minute. There are programs for children, and there are volunteers who come in every weeknight. And they help children with homework, they read with them, they play board games with them. That gives the parents an opportunity to maybe do some laundry or make some calls or have a little break in their day. There's a food pantry, and that's especially valuable to people who leave the shelter but still receive services for a period of time to help them. And shelter staff say it's one way once people graduate from their program and go into housing, it's one way to check in with them, to have them come back and use the pantry, because that may give them an early red flag that maybe things are not going well, and they can kind of beef up support again. There are scholarship funds as well. The budget at the Carpenter Shelter is about $3 million. And I think what people often don't know and find really interesting is that on a typical year, over 90% of that budget comes from private sources and non-governmental sources. Congregations like us, individuals, including many Westminster members, business organizations, foundations, etc. There are over 1,000 active volunteers with the shelter, and the staff estimates that they do the work of about 9 full-time staff members. The front desk at the shelter is staffed by volunteers, including Westminster members, 16 hours a day, 365 days a year. And volunteers provide lunch and dinner to shelter residents again every day of the year. The average length of stay at Carpenter Shelter is between 2 and 3 months. It's a little bit on the short side for individuals, but as you can imagine, a little bit longer for families, as it's a little more difficult to find affordable housing for families. They tell us that 95% of the residents who utilize all of their support services during their stay remain in a stable housing situation 1 year after they graduate and move out into housing. In addition, Carpenters operates a related but separate facility that's attached to the main shelter called David's Place. And that's a place where unsheltered homeless individuals can go for certain hours of the day and get a shower, do some laundry, get some snacks, get some help. We also start to build relationships with some shelter staff as maybe a gateway to getting into the shelter. And those are the people who, as a result of either mental illness or addiction, do not want to live in the shelter. As part of David's Place, there's also winter and hypothermia shelter available for that population during the winter months.
So how do we fit in and what specifically is our involvement? As I mentioned, we go back 30 years. We provide financial support through, as Stephanie mentioned, our missions budget. We gave money, as I mentioned earlier, for the capital campaign, and we're one of 7 congregations named in a plaque in the lobby of the new building. We've given, at least on 2 occasions, grants for specific purposes through our community grant program, and Westminster individuals give money to the shelter to our alternative giving bazaar every year. In addition to that, we provide dinner on the first Monday of each month and have, I've been doing that on and off going back 25 years. And Marty, who's here today, she coordinated that. Marty, for 10 years, 15 years? About very, very long time. So we have a great dedicated group of volunteers who participate in the dinner service every month. One of our Westminster members went to a volunteer orientation to do some additional work at the shelter. And when they introduced themselves as a member of Westminster, the staff said, "Oh, you're the group that goes nuts." So we wear that as kind of a badge of honor. The first Monday of the month dinners, we're the group that goes nuts. And what we try to do, and of course, these are little things, but we provide choices to people. So other congregations or groups, obviously, they do what they can and have the resources for, but one organization might do spaghetti and meatballs. A different night it's lasagna. We always have choices for people. And when you're homeless and you're in the shelter, you don't have a lot of choices in life. So we always have fried chicken. And then we have another entree. We have a variety of vegetables. We have green salads, fruit salads, and then Marilyn Eckert does a whole dessert buffet every month. So we enjoy when we're able to serve a really nice, delicious, healthy meal with lots of choices for different likes and different diets on the first Monday of each month. Some of our regular volunteers include Jane Ring, Becky Davies, and Ellen Jones. And at least Jane and Becky have been at this for 30 years. They no longer come every month, but they sponsor the chicken, they pay for the chicken, which Michelle Johnson picks up and brings. So that's a very long record of service. Bob Coulter, Becky Cool, Carolyn Judy, Marilyn Eckert, Kathy Stenzel, Carol Dickerson, Carrie Ewald, and many, many others. How have we, actually, before I move on, and again, many, many members of Westminster, including many who I'm not even aware of, volunteer in other ways individually and not through our church, either at the front desk or with children's hour or in different ways. As to how the shelter was affected by the pandemic, financially, the shelter did not take a big hit. People continued to give, and so there were not adverse financial consequences, but program-wise, it's been a tough stretch. The shelter had to reduce its capacity from 60 to about 40 to allow for social distancing and to keep everybody safe, particularly in those single dorm room type accommodations where you have maybe 6 people. They had to reduce there. And for many, many months, volunteers were not around in the building. This was before people, before vaccines were available. And so staff really was taxed with having to do the work with all the volunteers in terms of serving and manning the front desk and so forth. So at that time during the pandemic, most of that time they were over at Macy's and we would drop the food off and staff would take it in and serve it. As of a couple of weeks ago, none of the residents of the shelter has contracted COVID while in the shelter, so they have been quite effective at keeping people safe. We recently went back in and started serving again, although we're not sitting with the residents at the tables and eating dinner alongside them because the vaccination rate at the shelter among the residents is not what we would hope it would be. And obviously people are not masked when they're eating. Also during the pandemic, carpenters in collaboration with the city stood up and in 1 week's time an additional shelter at the Charles Winston Rec Center and also in the north part of Old Town. And that was to serve that unsheltered homeless population. And Westminster members really came out of the woodwork. We decided to double up on our meals and take food over there. And so a lot of people in our congregation who, for whatever obligations, aren't able to regularly contribute food, were like bringing food over there, delicious homemade meals. Client base, as Stephanie said, Blacks are large overrepresented as a percentage of the population. Interestingly, Latinos are underrepresented as well as whites, but when we go in and serve and volunteer, there are all kinds of people, as you can imagine, in there, including families who look like they may have walked out of Sunday service here in our congregation. In terms of racial equity, the staff and the board, as Stephanie mentioned, have been looking at the link between racial equity and homelessness for the past several years. And they have dedicated themselves toward deeper professional development, toward better understanding racial equity issues, recruiting staff and board members. And we're also looking at contracts with vendors to try to make sure that they have racial equity in mind. In addition, Carpenter's has a monthly newsletter called the Volunteer Vine, and they've had a series for the past year of monthly articles on different racial equity issues, including things like racial equity in medicine, or history of redlining, and many other topics. The Center for Nonprofit Advancement gave its 2021 Board Leadership Award to Carpenter's. And in the award presentation, they mentioned Carpenter's work in this area. And finally, how has our work impacted my faith journey? I guess volunteering through Westminster has broadened my perspective on the real need in the community. It's also allowed me to work alongside people who I might otherwise not get to know in our congregation. And it's given me deeper understanding and a lot of gratification, seeing firsthand how our collective efforts, not only those at Westminster, but congregations and other organizations in the community, all of our little individual pieces add up to a really meaningful difference.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Eric and Louise, for that. Let's give them a round of applause for sharing. I apologize, we do have to look at the hour. This is quite a day for Mission at Westminster. So Stephanie, who was going to give a little bit talk about what's coming next and what we're looking at, I guess I'll summarize quickly and say that's next. Is really trying to see what are the new things we can do in the areas of race and local missions, so that what we're doing can further address those slides that we saw earlier in the program. But we have guest speaker from Bridges to Independence, one of our major partners today, speaking as a minute from Mission 11. Stephanie's already spoken at 8:30. She's come here. She's going to hear the sermon twice. So Stephanie also has got a full day. Halo glowing. So I'm going to let Stephanie go so she can make sure that Christina and or Sam are okay downstairs. Sam's maybe coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a maybe. So. We can do some time for questions. Are you all okay to stick around for 5 to 10 minutes? People of the Zoom, you can just go to worship without having to change much. You just push a button, so you get no excuse. You have to stay. But if there are questions of the panel or this whole class, I'll gladly entertain a few of those. But I'm gonna have to go get roped up as well. Go for it.
Well, Eric, I wanted to ask you, I have a neighbor who doesn't have a working stove in her kitchen. And I'm wondering what I could do to get her helped by rebuilding.
If you can contact Rebuilding Together, they recently merged with the DC Rebuilding, so I don't remember the current web address, but if you Google Rebuilding Alexandria, you'll come up with them, and if you contact them, they can find out what they can do. We have at times, yes, put in new appliances for people. If it's gas, we may need to have a professional come in and look it up properly, make sure it's done properly.
Okay, so basically Google to get the address.
Yeah.
Or local, if you email local mission at Westminster, or just email me or somebody, and we'll make sure it gets to.
Okay.
to Eric or to whomever, and we'll get you there. Judy,
I guess this is more of a comment, but I'm relatively new to Alexandria. I've been here about 4 years and I've been to Westminster about 3, almost 3. And I've heard about all these organizations. I've been to the giving thing at Christmas and all that. But hearing you all talk about your individual experiences and what's available at these organizations, really just, I think that's the kind of information that we need to hear.
Great.
Yeah.
So we can put ourselves into it and say, you know, I would like to help with homework, or I would like to help do some building, or whatever it is. I think it would help bring it maybe a little closer to some of us.
To the lived experience, as it's
Yeah.
affected the lived
Yeah, so
experience
thank you
of
very
history,
much,
yeah.
which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Let me just make a comment. Last night, I happened to have some friends over from out of town, meaning not Alexandria. And we got talking about some of all the different things that are going on in Alexandria. And I mean, we just never ran out of things to brag about the city about. And I don't even live in Alexandria. I live just outside the Beltway in Fairfax. So it's an amazing community. Beyond Westminster is an amazing church, but the community at large is very concerned about these equity issues. And I don't know of many places around the country that are.
All right, Joanne had her hand up. Is this to address this, or is this connect, just to make sure?
Well, I was just gonna add something, which was, I think the fun thing about it is that our groups, I have a lot of, over the years, I had ex-offenders volunteering for me, including almost every month I would have ladies from guest house who have to perform certain community service volunteering for me. And so Westminster, you know, you have a group of kids, and if they were gonna be delivering in the building, usually they were gonna be with a felon. And I had a very long time volunteer, Mr. Alfred, everybody's Mr. or Ms. on my site. Mr. Alfred, and Mr. Alfred was ex-offender, and he was very verbal about talking about redemption. I mean, I know that there were kids who were like,
What is this?
yeah, they never met anybody who'd ever been in jail before. And it's a beautiful thing.
These are encounters.
Absolutely.
Joanne, I mean, you might get the last word.
Well, real quick, and it is for you, Louise.
Oh, there you go.
It would seem the bottom line goal in a lot of situations, he said, will be self-sustaining for the families themselves. So the families become self-sustaining. My concern, and you said the Child Development Center had closed. Do you know what the reasons behind the closing of the Child Development Center was?
I do, because what they found over time was that the CDC, which is the Alive headquarters over here on King Street at the Assembly of God Church, that services they were providing were redundant, and that so many of the families that they were trying to serve lived in the West End and couldn't get over there.
Oh,
So that there are groups that are actually in the West End who are able to provide those services to the
Okay.
kids. So it really was, it was
I hear you. Yeah,
redundant.
thank you.
So they closed it like 3 years ago. It was right before pandemic. So,
But that's where the need really was, yeah, thank you.
yeah, so trust me, they wanted to make sure the kids were gonna be able to get those services. It's just, it wasn't convenient to do it there
Thank you.
anymore.
The Child and Family Network Center has West End
Exactly. They're there.
preschools and those
Yeah.
kinds of things.
Right.
So community lodging is
Right.
here locally in Alexandria.
Right.
So we could talk a long time. And there's a lot more to be said, a lot more that hasn't been said, but I just really want to thank my colleagues, especially for helping put this together. Thank you all for coming and for leaning into this with us. And of course, to our local missions team who make us proud. And really, many of you have been named officially volunteers of the year, but you all merit that honor. So let us have a word of prayer, and then we will proceed to worship. Lord, we know that your heart grieves at the suffering of your people, and your heart lifts at their beauty and the beauty of those who serve alongside them, including Eric and Ruth and Louise and Deborah and Marty and all those at Westminster who have shown up in some way. And we thank you that we can show up with our funds, of course, and our support structurally, but also with our individual presence. As Judaism, we would help us to make those connections and links so that even more may be moved by your spirit in this way, so that we will grow in racial awareness and understanding and the inequity of this world. Though we may not be able to fix it, we may be part of the solution that you see in Christ. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.